Mommy? Why did she leave us? The choked cry of one of the twins was lost in the wind's howl, while the other, feverish, merely trembled, his small emerald eyes clouded with pain and fear. The millionaire widow had abandoned them, two tiny heirs in the damp darkness of the forest, under a sky ripped by thunder. Tiny bodies huddled, the cold bit at their skin, and fear clutched their chests, when a pair of hungry eyes gleamed in the gloom. But what emerged from the shadows defied all logic of nature and terror. The eyes gleaming in the gloom were not those of a common predator. They were of a blue so pale it seemed made of moonlight itself, reflecting the mystical aura of a legendary creature. From the shadows, a being of indescribable beauty emerged, an albino tiger, majestic and imposing, its fur white as the purest snow, marked by almost imperceptible stripes like divine calligraphy. It moved with silent grace, its muscles rippling beneath its flawless skin. The small twins, whose names were Leo and Theo, could barely breathe, paralyzed between terror and a strange fascination. Leo, the elder by a few minutes, tried to embrace Theo, who trembled uncontrollably, a weak whimper escaping his fever-parched lips. The tiger, instead of advancing, stopped a few feet away, its eyes fixed on the boys. There was no hunger in them, nor malice, only a deep and ancient wisdom. It tilted its head as if assessing them, and a soft growl, more like a deep purr, vibrated in its chest. It was a sound that should have terrified, but somehow it brought a strange calm to Leo's heart. The legendary creature took a step forward, then another, until it was very close. The scent of the forest, of wet earth and something wild, yet not threatening, enveloped the boys. Leo, with the little strength he had left, raised a trembling small hand, as if wanting to touch the creature. The tiger lowered its head even further, bringing its snout closer to the boy. Leo could feel the animal's warm, damp breath, and surprisingly, he felt no fear. On the contrary, a wave of warmth spread through his body, a warmth that did not come from the fever, but from an unexpected sense of security. The tiger, with a slow and deliberate movement, lay down beside the boys, its enormous, warm body forming a barrier against the biting wind and the fine rain that was still falling. It enveloped them with its presence, and Theo, instinctively, crawled a little closer to the animal's soft, warm fur, nestling against it. Leo, watching his brother find solace in the white giant, felt a tear roll down his face, but it was not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief. Theo's fever seemed to lessen slightly under the tiger's warmth, and his crying ceased, replaced by calmer breaths. As the night advanced, Lady Isadora, the widow, slept soundly in her opulent mansion, the sound of the storm muffled by thick walls and the luxury of her chambers. In her mind, the plan had been executed perfectly. The small, frail, and sick heirs would be swallowed by merciless nature, and with them, the last barrier to her limitless fortune. She smiled in her dreams, an expression of pure greed distorting her thin lips. But in the forest, under the dark canopy of trees, destiny was writing a different story. The albino tiger, an improbable guardian, watched over the boys, its blue eyes gleaming in the darkness. Vigilant, it gently licked Leo's damp hair, a tender gesture that spoke of an ancestral connection, of a silent promise. The dangers of the wild, the nocturnal sounds, the invisible predators, all seemed to recede before the majestic presence of the feline. The twins, nestled against the tiger's living warmth, found an unexpected refuge, a safe harbor in the heart of the wildest lands. Hope, fragile as a flame in the storm, began to flicker. The first light of morning, pale and timid, crept through the dense leaves of the forest, painting the damp ground with shades of green and gold. Leo slowly opened his eyes, feeling his body heavy and sore. but a strange sensation of warmth and security enveloped him. Beside him, Theo slept deeply, his face still flushed with fever, but his breathing more regular and less labored. The white giant was there, majestic and still, like a living statue, its blue eyes half closed, yet vigilant. The tiger's soft, warm fur was an improbable blanket, and Leo realized that the storm had ceased, leaving only the fresh scent of wet earth and the distant song of birds. With an effort, Leo sat up, feeling the weakness in his legs. He looked at the tiger, which fully opened its eyes, fixing them on the boy with a gentle intensity. Leo extended his small hand again, hesitantly. This time the tiger not only lowered its head, but brushed its snout against his palm, a gesture of trust that filled Leo's heart with an indescribable emotion. It was fear, yes, but also a deep gratitude and a connection he never imagined possible. The fur was soft, and the skin beneath warm and vibrant. Theo began to stir, waking with a weak moan. Leo hugged him, feeling his brother's forehead, which seemed less warm. "Theo, are you better?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Theo blinked, his emerald eyes still a little cloudy, but with a glimmer of recognition. He looked at the tiger, and, instead of dread, a remnant of childlike curiosity appeared on his pale face. The tiger, as if understanding, emitted another deep purr, and Theo, with surprising courage, stretched out a finger to touch the animal's snout. The tiger allowed it, patient and serene. Hunger, however, began to gnaw. The boys' stomachs rumbled, and their weakness intensified. The tiger seemed to notice. It rose with calculated slowness, stretching its muscular body, and then looked at the boys, then in a specific direction in the forest. There was no doubt in its eyes. It was an invitation to follow. Leo, understanding the silent message, took Theo's hand. "Come on, Theo. He'll help us," he said, more to himself than to his brother. The first steps were difficult. The forest, though calmer, was still a labyrinth of exposed roots, fallen branches, and slippery mud. The tiger went ahead, moving with impressive ease, sometimes stopping to wait for the boys to catch up, other times using its body to push thorny branches aside, clearing a safer path for its small charges. It did not rush them, seeming to understand the fragility of their steps. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Lady Isadora awoke to a sunny day, completely oblivious to her nephew's miraculous survival. She descended to the dining room, where a lavish breakfast awaited her. A smile of satisfaction, cold and calculating, curved her lips. In her mind, the twins were already a distant memory, swallowed by the oblivion of the forest. Her late husband's fortune would now be hers, without troublesome heirs. She savored her coffee, tasting the bitter flavor of victory. In the forest, the journey continued. Leo and Theo, exhausted but driven by an invisible force, followed the white guardian. The tiger, with its constant presence, was a beacon of hope amidst the green immensity. Leo looked at his brother, who despite his fatigue seemed more alert. The connection with the tiger deepened with each step, a bond forged in adversity. They did not know where they were going, but they trusted blindly in the majestic animal, which seemed to carry in its eyes the promise of a new beginning, of a safe place beyond the darkness of the forest. With each step, hope became less fragile, more a pillar of their improbable journey. With each step, Leo's body protested, but the image of Theo, pale and tired, spurred him on. He squeezed his brother's hand, feeling the palm damp with sweat and fear. The tiger, imposing and silent, guided them, its fluid movements contrasting with the boys' difficulty. It stopped, its eyes blue as sapphires, encouraging them. Leo felt the animal as a protector of destiny. The forest, once a place of terror, seemed less threatening under its watchful eye. The sun rose higher, but the warmth did not alleviate their hunger. Theo, with a whimper, stumbled. Leo held him. The tiger, seeing the scene, stopped, With delicacy, it brushed its snout against Theo's leg, offering comfort. It lay down, allowing the boys to lean against it, the soft fur and warmth, a balm. Leo caressed the tiger's head, feeling the gentle purr, a melody of protection. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Lady Isadora finished her coffee, leafing through newspapers. The water scarcity in the neighboring region caught her attention, but only for profit. The twins did not occupy her thoughts. Her greed covered any trace of humanity. She imagined her husband's fortune, now entirely hers, and a smile of triumph danced on her lips. The outside world did not touch her. In the forest, the tiger stood up, indicating it was time to continue. Leo and Theo, refreshed by the rest and affection, gathered their last strength. The landscape changed. Trees gave way to clearings, and the ground showed traces of a less wild path. Leo noticed the sunlight much more easily, and the air was lighter. A distant sound, like the croaking of frogs or a stream, reached their ears. Hope, once a flickering point, now expanded in Leo's chest. He looked at Theo, who, despite his exhaustion, seemed to have regained his color. The tiger ahead seemed more determined, quickening its pace. With each turn, the anticipation grew. Were they approaching a place where Lady Isadora's cruelty could not reach them? The tiger stopped on an elevation, and Leo and Theo struggled to reach it. From there, through the foliage, they glimpsed something that made their hearts leap. Faint smoke on the horizon and the sound of human voices. It was a village, a sign of life, of civilization beyond the dark forest and the cold mansion. Leo felt a wave of emotion that he could barely contain his tears. He squeezed Theo's hand, and his brother, understanding the glimpse, smiled weakly. The tiger beside them emitted a deep purr, as if sharing their joy. Its blue eyes, once vigilant, now seemed to carry a gleam of satisfaction. The journey was far from over, but the promise of a new beginning and a safe place was visible on the horizon. The White Guardian had fulfilled its part, guiding them from darkness to light. The sight of the village, faint on the horizon, infused Leo with a strength he didn't know he possessed. He squeezed Theo's hand, and together they descended the elevation, the albino tiger ahead, its firm steps clearing the way. The sound of human voices grew clearer, mixing with the croaking of frogs and the murmur of a nearby stream. The smell of wood smoke and homemade food, so different from the damp aroma of the forest, filled their lungs, awakening an even more intense hunger. With each step, hope solidified, transforming from a distant glimpse into a palpable promise. When they reached the edge of the forest, where the trees opened to an uneven field leading to the first wooden and thatched houses, the tiger stopped. Its blue eyes met Leo's, and there was a silent farewell, a mutual understanding that transcended words. The majestic animal brushed its snout against Leo's head one last time, a gesture of affection and goodbye. Then, with innate grace, it turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest, as silently as it had appeared. Leo felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and sadness, but he knew the Guardian had fulfilled its mission. The boys, now alone, staggered the last few meters, their bodies exhausted, but their hearts filled with new courage. The first houses were modest, with small gardens and smoke rising from chimneys. A woman with grey hair and a sun-weathered face, who was watering her plants, looked up and saw them. Her serene expression transformed into shock. Dropping the watering can, she ran towards them, arms outstretched. It was Mara, the village healer, known for her kind heart and healing hands. "Heavens, children, what happened to you?" Mara exclaimed, kneeling and embracing the boys. Leo and Theo collapsed into her arms, their strength abandoning them. Mara felt Theo's fever, Leo's thin body, and the despair in their eyes. With the help of neighbors who approached, drawn by Mara's cries, the boys were taken to her small, cozy home. There they were carefully cleaned, fed warm broth, and put to rest in soft beds, wrapped in warm blankets, while Theo slept deeply, his fever subsiding under Mara's care. Leo, with a hoarse and broken voice, tried to tell his story. He spoke of the mommy who had left them in the forest, of the darkness, the cold, and, with wide eyes, of the big white cat that protected and guided them. The villagers, who gathered in silence, listened with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. An albino tiger, a legend, yes, but one that had saved them? It seemed unbelievable, but the boys' condition and the truth in their eyes could not be denied. Far away in the opulent mansion, Lady Isadora was in her study, reviewing documents and smiling with satisfaction. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the pile of papers that confirmed her total possession of the fortune. She did not spare a single thought for her nephews, who, in her mind, were already part of the past. Greed consumed her completely, blinding her to any possibility that her cruel plan might have failed. She toasted herself with a goblet of expensive wine, celebrating her victory. In the village, however, the twins' story began to spread. The community, united by compassion, promised to care for the boys. The legend of the white tiger, which was once just a whisper, now gained a new dimension, weaving itself into Leo and Theo's miraculous survival. The truth, still in fragments, began to emerge from the darkness of the forest, and with it the promise that justice, sooner or later, would find its way, even into the most remote corners of that empire of secrets. In Mara's small, cozy home, Leo and Theo found a refuge that seemed like a distant dream. The scent of fresh herbs and baked bread replaced the damp odor of the forest. Wrapped in soft blankets, their small bodies could finally relax. Theo, with his fever completely gone, slept a deep and restorative sleep, his pale face gaining a rosier hue. Leo, though still weak, watched Mara with curious eyes as she prepared an herbal tea, her gentle movements and warm smile a balm for the boy's frightened heart. Mara, with her ancestral wisdom, knew that the healing of the body was only the beginning. She observed Leo, who, despite all the horror, maintained a glimmer of resilience in his emerald eyes. The boy's words about the mommy who abandoned them and the big white cat who saved them echoed in her mind. The legend of the albino tiger was ancient, told by the elders on full moon nights, but never before had it manifested so palpably. Mara felt a deep certainty, a premonition that Leo and Theo's story was more than a childish delusion. There was a cruel truth behind their appearance. News of the twins' arrival and the incredible story of the white tiger spread like wildfire through the small community. The villagers, initially skeptical, visited Mara's house, bringing offerings of food and clothing. They observed the boys, their faces marked by exhaustion and fear, and disbelief gave way to compassion. How could two such small children have survived alone in the forest, especially amidst a storm, without the intervention of something extraordinary? Whispers about the tiger legend turned into more serious conversations, and a silent indignation began to grow against the cruelty that had led them to that situation. Meanwhile, in the opulent mansion, Lady Isadora enjoyed the tranquility of her victory. She spent the day in her rose garden, smiling to herself, imagining how she would spend the fortune she now considered hers by right. Her thoughts were filled with plans for luxurious trips and even more lucrative investments. The memory of her nephews was a distant blur, conveniently erased by her overwhelming greed. She felt invincible, untouchable, completely oblivious to the web of events unfolding in the distant village, a web that, slowly but surely, was beginning to tighten around her. Leo and Theo, under the loving care of Mara and the villagers, began to flourish. Theo, who was once the most fragile, regained his strength with surprising speed. and his childlike laughter, long silenced by fear, began to echo through the house again. Leo, in turn, felt the weight of the trauma diminish. He and Theo spent hours drawing the big white cat, their memories of the legendary creature vivid and full of gratitude. The connection between the brothers deepened, forged in adversity and miraculous salvation. They were living proof that hope could blossom even in the darkest of nights. Mara, observing the boys' recovery and hearing their stories repeatedly, felt her heart fill with unwavering determination. The cruelty that had befallen them could not go unpunished. The story of the albino tiger, the improbable guardian, was a sign, a message that divine justice, or perhaps human justice, needed to act. She summoned the village elders, her eyes shining with new resolve. "We cannot ignore this," she said, her voice firm. "These children were abandoned to die, and there is a white tiger, a legend, who brought them to us. There is a truth to be discovered, and we will find it." The elders, hearing the passion in Mara's voice and seeing the living proof in the boy's eyes, nodded in silence. The community, united by a sense of altruism and justice, was ready to unravel the mystery. The story of the twins and the white tiger, which began as a tale of horror and miracle, was about to transform into a quest for justice, a journey that, unbeknownst to Lady Isadora, would reach her in her ivory tower, revealing the truth behind her merciless greed. The discussion among the elders in Mara's house stretched into the night, lit only by an oil lamp. Their wrinkled faces, marked by life and wisdom, reflected a deep seriousness. Mara, her voice choked with emotion, reiterated Leo and Theo's story, every detail of the abandonment and the miraculous salvation by the white tiger. "We cannot let this evil go unpunished," she insisted, her eyes fixed on each of them. "These children are a gift, proof that good always finds a way. But the woman who did this, she needs to be confronted." Elder Kyle, the oldest and most respected in the village, stroked his white beard. "But how, Mara? We are a simple, isolated people. The mansion Leo speaks of, the empire of wealth. That is far beyond our reach. How can we prove the truth if the word of frightened children is all we have?" Another elder, Ilara, known for her keen intuition, interjected. "The legend of the albino tiger is not just a tale, Kyle. He is a guardian. If he brought the boys to us, there is a greater purpose. Truth has a way of revealing itself, even in the most hidden places." While the adults deliberated, Leo and Theo slept peacefully in their makeshift beds, their faces serene, oblivious to the complexity of the task that awaited them. Mara visited them, covering them with another blanket, and a pang of renewed determination struck her. They deserved justice. They deserved a safe and happy life. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Mara and the elders decided that the first step would be to gather more information. They instructed the few travelers who occasionally passed through the village to be alert for any news about missing children or a rich widow in an imposing mansion. It was a needle in a haystack, but it was all they had. Lady Isadora, in her mansion, continued to swim in her illusion of victory. She had hired private detectives to confirm her nephew's disappearance, paying them generously not to ask too many questions. The vague and inconclusive reports were exactly what she wanted, a confirmation that the boys had vanished without a trace, likely victims of the wild. She reveled in the idea that no one would ever discover the truth, toasting herself with expensive wine and the certainty of her impunity. In the village, hope was a flickering but persistent flame. Leo and Theo, now stronger and full of life, helped Mara with small tasks, their laughter filling the house. They drew the white tiger on pieces of tree bark, a silent tribute to their savior. Then, on a sunny afternoon, an unexpected event broke the village routine. An itinerant merchant, a middle-aged man named Silas, with a kind face and curious eyes, arrived with his cart full of fabrics and spices. He was known for his vast route, which included remote villages and even the vicinity of the empire's capital. As he set up his tent, Silas noticed the presence of two children who did not seem to be from the village. Leo, with his natural curiosity, approached the cart, marveling at the colors of the fabrics. Mara, noticing the interaction, invited Silas for tea. During the conversation, she cautiously began to tell the story of the twins, mentioning their abandonment in the forest and the albino tiger. Silas listened intently, his eyes widening with every detail. When Mara described Leo and Theo and the mommy who left them, he paled. "Children. With green eyes?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "And the names? Leo and Theo? It can't be." Mara and the elders, who had joined the conversation, felt a chill. "What do you know, Silas?" asked Cale, his voice tense. Silas placed his teacup on the table, his hands trembling slightly. "I knew Baron Valerius, these boys' father, and his widow, Lady Isadora. I heard rumors, whispers about her greed, and about how her nephews, heirs to the fortune, had disappeared mysteriously a few weeks ago. It was said they were frail children with fever. And the green eyes, the color of the Valerius." A heavy silence fell over the house. The truth, once a distant whisper, now materialized, brought by a stranger. The turning point had arrived. The connection between the village twins and the disappeared heirs of the Empire of Wealth was no longer a supposition, but a shocking revelation. Mara looked at the boys, then at Silas, a new hope and a righteous fury igniting in her eyes. The journey for justice, which seemed impossible, had just gained an unexpected and dangerous path. The silence in Mara's small house was broken by the crackling of the fireplace. Silas's words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Mara, with tear-filled eyes, looked at Leo and Theo, who were playing in the corner, oblivious to the conversation. Righteous fury mingled with sadness for the children, victims of cruelty. Kyle, the elder, composed himself. He leaned toward Silas, his voice low, firm. "Are you sure, Silas, that these are Baron Valerius's boys? That the widow Isadora is the mommy Leo speaks of?" Silas nodded, his face pale. The details fit Kyle. Green eyes, age, disappearance, and Lady Isadora's reputation. She was always cold, obsessed with riches. The Baron was good, but blind to her nature. Elara, the elder, touched Mara's shoulder. "The white tiger knew. He didn't bring them by chance. It's a sign, Mara, a sign that the truth needs to come out." Mara took a deep breath, determination hardening her features, courage igniting in her eyes. "Then we will ensure it does. No matter how powerful this woman is, her cruelty cannot go unpunished. These children deserve justice and a dignified life." The task, however, seemed monumental. How would an isolated village confront one of the Empire's richest women? The challenge was immense, a social and practical obstacle. Silas, sensing the hesitation, offered help. "I travel, I know people, I can take the story, but we need proof. Something more than children's testimony and a tiger's legend." Mara looked at Leo, who, hearing his name, raised his curious eyes. The boy, with his purity, was the most powerful proof. "Leo remembers everything," Mara said, her voice soft but convinced. "He remembers the mommy, the forest, the tiger. His memory is our witness." The elders agreed, showing resolve. The first step would be to formalize the story, with a document signed by Silas and the elders, detailing what Leo had told. Silas committed to taking this information to the capital, where he knew an honest lawyer who could listen and help. It was a risk, but hope and altruism were powerful motivators. Mara explained to Leo in the simplest way that they would tell his story to important people so that the mommy wouldn't harm anyone else. Leo, with his childlike understanding, nodded, trusting Mara. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Lady Isadora finished a sumptuous dinner. She toasted herself with expensive wine, feeling like the mistress of the universe, untouchable and victorious. Each day, her conviction that her nephews had perished in the forest strengthened, and with it, her arrogance. She was already planning a new wing for the mansion, a testament to her power and wealth. The idea that a village or a merchant could uncover her secret was so absurd, it didn't even cross her mind. Her conscience was clouded by greed, unable to foresee the storm of justice forming on the horizon, driven by the courage of a united village and the truth of two children. Justice, slow but relentless, was on its way, woven by compassion and the miracle of the White Guardian, the Protector. The dawn in the village brought new energy, a mix of apprehension and growing hope. Silas, the merchant, acted quickly, with Kyle, whose handwriting was firm, and Ilara, who dictated clearly. They drafted the document. Every word of Leo's was transcribed, describing the night in the forest, Theo's fever, the appearance of the white tiger, and the mommy who had abandoned them. Mara, sitting nearby, watched Leo play with a rag doll, her heart aching from the cruelty endured. She reviewed each sentence, ensuring that the truth, pure and unadorned, was expressed. The document, though simple, carried the weight of a serious accusation and the promise of a revelation. The villagers, aware of Silas's mission, gathered to bid him farewell. They brought provisions, warm clothes, and words of encouragement. Their faces showed shared resolve. They knew they were challenging immense power, but the image of the boys and the legend of the white tiger had awakened in them an unwavering sense of justice. Silas, with the document tucked into his saddlebag, felt the weight of responsibility. He shook Kyle's hand, his eyes meeting Mara's. "I will do my best," he promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The truth will be heard." Leo and Theo, holding hands, waved to Silas as he departed in his cart. They didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening, but they felt the change in the air, the seriousness on the adults' faces. For them, it was just another day, a little different, but still full of the security that Mara and the village offered them. Theo, recovered, laughed as he chased a butterfly, and Leo, with a gentle smile, watched him, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, a stark contrast to the cold of the night in the forest. Mara, in turn, dedicated herself to strengthening the boys, physically and emotionally. She told stories of bravery and overcoming, teaching them that even in the greatest adversities, kindness and hope could prevail. Mara's house became a sanctuary of healing and love, a refuge against the darkness of the past. The elders continued to discuss strategies, aware that Silas was only the first step. They knew that the empire's bureaucracy was slow and Lady Isadora's influence vast. The social obstacle of a humble village against a powerful woman was the greatest challenge. Far away at the mansion, Lady Isadora celebrated her victory with a banquet for influential guests. She displayed expensive jewels and smiled with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her detectives had delivered reports confirming no trace of her nephews, and she felt completely secure. "Nature is cruel, unfortunately," she commented to her guests, a false lament, as she toasted her promising future. She planned to expand businesses, invest in land, and consolidate her power. The idea that her facade could be broken by a merchant and villagers was so absurd, it didn't even cross her mind. Her greed had isolated her in a bubble of self-deception where truth had no place. In the village, the weight was agonizing, but faith was unwavering. Mara, seeing Leo and Theo sleep, their faces serene, felt renewed strength. Justice was not just a word, It was the promise of a dignified future for these children. The human connection that had formed between the villagers and the twins was the true weapon against the widow's cruelty. They were united, not by wealth or power, but by a bond of compassion and an ardent desire to see good triumph. The path would be long and arduous, but the seed of justice had been planted, and it was beginning to sprout, silent but persistent, in the heart of that forgotten village, driven by the miracle of the White Guardian. Silas traveled for days, his cart creaking under the weight of goods, and more importantly, the hope of an entire village. With each mile that took him further from the forest and closer to the capital, the document in his saddlebag seemed to vibrate with the truth it contained. His thoughts alternated between the image of little Leo and Theo, with their emerald eyes full of gratitude, and the imposing figure of Lady Isadora, whose cruelty now had a name and a face. He knew he was carrying more than papers. He carried the destiny of 2 children and the faith of a community. The road was dusty and long, and the solitude of the journey gave him time to reflect on Mara's courage and the boy's unwavering purity. Upon arriving in the capital, the contrast was stark. The village was a whisper in the breeze, the capital a constant roar of carriages, voices, and the clinking of coins. Tall, imposing buildings rose, silent witnesses to the wealth and power that resided there. Silas felt a chill down his spine. How could the voice of a simple merchant and the story of a white tiger be heard amidst so much noise and grandeur? But the image of the boys, sleeping serenely in Mara's house, gave him strength. He found the office of lawyer Elias, a man of integrity, known for his honesty in a world often corrupted. Elias was a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses that slipped down his nose. His eyes, however, were sharp and perceptive. Silas was received with the expected formality. He sat before Elias's polished oak desk, his heart pounding. With slightly trembling hands, he handed over the document. Elias took the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. At first, his expression was one of skepticism, a slight furrowing of his brows. The story of an albino tiger saving abandoned children in the forest seemed more like a fairy tale than a factual account. However, as he continued reading, Leo's detailed description, Theo's fever, the mommy's cruelty, and the mention of the Valerius names began to change his expression. Elias's eyes widened. He looked up at Silas, his voice filled with an incredulity mixed with growing concern. You're telling me these are Baron Valerius's nephews? Elias asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The ones who were declared missing weeks ago, and that the widow Isadora. She's responsible for this. Silas nodded, his own voice choked. Yes, Mr. Elias. The details fit. The green eyes, the age, the story of the abandonment, and the tiger. He is real. He guided them to the village. Mara, the healer, and the elders are witnesses. Elias leaned back in his chair, the document still in his hands. The gravity of the situation hit him. He knew Lady Isadora's reputation, the greed that surrounded her, the rumors about her obsession with her late husband's fortune. The story, however fantastic it seemed, had a ring of truth that could not be ignored. The cruelty was palpable, and the injustice glaring. Meanwhile, in the opulent mansion, Lady Isadora enjoyed an afternoon tea in her rose garden. She leafed through a jewelry catalogue, smiling to herself. Her life was perfect, without the complications the boys represented. The idea that a merchant from a distant village could unearth her secret was so laughable it didn't even cross her mind. She was safe in her bubble of wealth and power, completely oblivious to the seed of justice that Silas had planted, and which now, in the hands of lawyer Elias, was beginning to germinate with unexpected force. In the village, the wait was a constant melody, a mix of anxiety and faith. Mara, Leo, and Theo continued to strengthen their bonds. Leo, with his sharp memory, drew the white tiger with more detail each day, and Theo, recovered, laughed with the carefree joy of childhood. The community, united, prayed for Silas and for the truth. The seed of justice, driven by compassion and the miracle of the White Guardian, was about to blossom, and its fragrance would reach even the most luxurious halls of the capital, unmasking cruelty and revealing the truth. Elias leaned back in his chair, the document still in his hands. The gravity of the situation hit him. He knew Lady Isadora's reputation, the greed that surrounded her, the rumors about her obsession with her late husband's fortune. The story, however fantastic it seemed, had a ring of truth that could not be ignored. The cruelty was palpable and the injustice glaring. The lawyer closed his eyes for an instant. The image of the frail boys Silas had described, abandoned in the darkness of the forest, disturbing his mind. It was a heinous crime, disguised by wealth and influence. Silas, sensing the hesitation but also the growing indignation in Elias's eyes, leaned forward. "Mr. Elias, I saw these boys. They are living proof. Leo, the elder, has the memory of an elephant and the purity of an angel. He described the mommy with a heartbreaking clarity. And the tiger. The legend is real. He saved them. There's something bigger at stake here, a justice that needs to be done." Elias opened his eyes, his expression now firmer. He knew the risk he ran in confronting Lady Isadora. Her fortune gave her access to the best lawyers and a network of influence that stretched across the empire. Many would be afraid, but Elias, with his unwavering integrity, could not ignore the cry for justice emanating from those pages and from Silas's voice. The image of the boy's green eyes, the Valerius inheritance, was etched in his mind. "It's a difficult battle, Silas," Elias said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Lady Isadora is powerful, but the truth has a strength that not all the wealth in the world can silence. I accept the case. We'll need more than children's testimony and a tiger's legend, but it's a start. We'll begin with a discreet investigation to gather more evidence so that Leo and Theo's story is unquestionable." Silas felt immense relief, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He shook Elias's hand with gratitude. "The entire village is with you. Their faith is unwavering." Meanwhile, in the opulent mansion, Lady Isadora enjoyed an afternoon tea in her rose garden. She leafed through a jewelry catalogue, smiling to herself. Her life was perfect, without the complications the boys represented. The idea that a merchant from a distant village could unearth her secret was so laughable it didn't even cross her mind. She was safe in her bubble of wealth and power, completely oblivious to the seed of justice that Silas had planted, and which now, in the hands of lawyer Elias, was beginning to germinate with unexpected force. Her smile, however, wavered for a brief instant as she saw a white butterfly land on her book, a fleeting reminder of something pure and untouchable, but she soon brushed it away, returning to her jewels. In the village, the wait was a constant melody, a mix of anxiety and faith. Mara, Leo, and Theo continued to strengthen their bonds. Leo, with his sharp memory, drew the white tiger with more detail each day, and Theo, recovered, laughed with the carefree joy of childhood. The community, united, prayed for Silas and for the truth. The seed of justice, driven by compassion and the miracle of the White Guardian, was about to blossom, and its fragrance would reach even the most luxurious halls of the capital, unmasking cruelty and revealing the truth. The human connection that united them was a shield against despair, and each day hope grew, silent but powerful, like nature itself that had protected the boys. Elias, in turn, was already beginning to plot his first moves, each step calculated to unravel the web of lies. Elias, with his integrity, delved into Lady Isadora's web of lies. His steps were discreet, as promised to Silas. Avoiding direct confrontation, he examined public records of Baron Valerius, discovering significant financial movements by Isadora before the boy's disappearance. Large sums transferred to secret accounts indicated premeditation. He sought out former employees dismissed by Isadora. Without making accusations, he collected fragments. The boy's sudden illness, Isadora's insistence on caring for them that night, and the abrupt dismissal of a concerned wet nurse, each piece, insignificant in isolation, formed a dark and undeniable mosaic. Meanwhile, in the opulent mansion, Lady Isadora lived in her bubble of self-deception, absorbed in preparations for a grand ball, a celebration of her new freedom and fortune. Her days were filled with luxurious gowns and meetings with architects. The white butterfly was forgotten. She laughed with friends about the tragedy of her nephews, disguising her cruelty with false sorrow. Her mind, clouded by wealth, could not conceive that the outside world could penetrate her fortress of privilege. In the village, life continued its rhythm, but with growing tension and hope. Mara watched Leo and Theo, strong and full of life, running through the fields. Leo still drew the majestic white tiger, and Mara, with a lump in her throat, perceived the boy's purity and resilience. She hugged them tighter, knowing that justice was a beacon of hope for all vulnerable children. The elders, Cale and Elara, kept faith, discussing Silas's progress, who sent coded messages, keeping the flame alive. Days turned into weeks of waiting and arduous work. Elias, with a robust dossier, scheduled a secret audience with the High Magistrate of the Empire, an inflexible and impartial man. It was risky, given Isadora's influence, but Elias had enough evidence to force an official investigation. He presented Silas's document, transcripts of Leo's testimony, financial inconsistencies, and reports from former employees. The magistrate listened in silence, his face impassive, but his eyes revealed attention and growing indignation. When Elias finished, a heavy silence filled the room. The magistrate, with white hair and piercing eyes, finally spoke, his voice grave and authoritative. "Mr. Elias, the story is extraordinary, the cruelty is unspeakable, and the evidence is more than sufficient to act immediately." He slammed his fist on the table, righteous fury on his face. "No wealth can hide such depravity. Lady Isadora will be summoned. The Valerius boys will be brought to the capital to testify under protection. Justice will be done, and it will be relentless." At that exact moment at the mansion, Lady Isadora toasted her promising future, oblivious to the storm. Suddenly, an official messenger bearing the High Magistrate's seal arrived at the door. She received him with disdain, thinking it a trivial formality. Upon reading the summons, her face paled drastically. The wineglass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering loudly on the marble floor. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and the arrogant smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. The bubble of self-deception had burst. The climax had arrived, not with violence, but with the relentless and overwhelming force of truth. Lady Isadora's empire of lies began to crumble, and the promise of justice, once a distant whisper, now echoed like powerful thunder, announcing the end of her impunity and the triumph of compassion over limitless greed. The sound of crystal shattering on the floor echoed in the mansion's vast marble hall, a dark omen for Lady Isadora. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably as she reread the summons, the High Magistrate's words dancing before her blurred eyes. Summoned, testimony, abandonment. The bubble of self-deception that had enveloped her for so long, fueled by her greed and arrogance, had finally burst, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The chilling terror she felt was a brutal contrast to the confidence she had displayed for years. She tried, in a fit of desperation, to summon her lawyers, her influential contacts, but the magistrate's authority was unquestionable. No one dared defy a direct order from such a high instance. The network of power she believed she had woven around herself unraveled like a spiderweb under the weight of truth. Influential friends, once so solicitous, now averted their gaze, fearing to be associated with her imminent downfall. The social obstacle she imposed on others now turned against her, isolating her completely. Meanwhile, in the village, the news of Lady Isadora's summons arrived like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. Silas, returning with a smile of relief, brought confirmation of the magistrate's action. Mara hugged Leo and Theo tightly, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. The boys, with their bright green eyes, felt the contagious joy, though they still didn't understand the magnitude of the victory. The journey to the capital this time was different. Leo and Theo, accompanied by Mara, Silas, and the elders Kyle and Ilara, were treated with the utmost respect and protection. The carriage that took them was comfortable, and each of the villagers felt the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope. In the capital, they were received in a secure residence, away from the curious eyes of high society. The meeting with the High Magistrate was solemn. Leo, holding Mara's hand, looked at the white-haired man with disarming innocence. When asked about the night in the forest, he described, with the simplicity and clarity of a child, the mommy who had left them, Theo's fever, the cold and fear, and then the majestic appearance of the white tiger. His gestures were small but full of conviction, and his eyes, so pure, left no room for doubt. Theo, though younger, confirmed with babbling and nods, pointing to the drawing of the tiger that Leo always carried. The truth, emanating from a child's mouth, was more powerful than any legal argument. The magistrate, moved, proclaimed the resolution. Lady Isadora was stripped of all the fortune she had usurped. Her greed, once her greatest asset, became her ruin. She would face the consequences of her actions, not with imprisonment or violence, but with the loss of her status, her wealth, and her reputation, condemned to live in obscurity, far from the luxury and power she so coveted. Justice, slow but relentless, had prevailed. Leo and Theo were officially recognized as the legitimate heirs of Baron Valerius. The wealth, which one day almost cost them their lives, now guaranteed their future. The village, in turn, was honored for its courage and altruism. Elias, the lawyer, was praised for his integrity. The family, now reunited and safe, represented the victory of human connection. The white tiger, the improbable guardian, became an even greater legend, a symbol that hope can arise in the most unexpected places, and that kindness, even in darkness, always finds a way to light. The boys, now under Mara's guardianship, who would be their legal tutor, had a bright future ahead, a dignified life, full of love and security, far from the shadow of cruelty. The seed of justice had fully blossomed. Mara, her heart overflowing with joy, watched Leo and Theo adapt to their new life. The secure residence in the capital, provided by the magistrate, was a temporary home, but full of warmth. The boys, now under her legal guardianship, flourished. Leo spent hours drawing the white tiger and the gentle faces of Mara, Silas, and the elders. His childlike strokes captured their kindness. Theo, in turn, had fully recovered his vivacity. His laughter echoed, a sweet sound that chased away the darkness of the past. They played in the garden, finally feeling safe. Mara, with gentle gestures, guided them, teaching them about love, resilience, and truth. This new home was a sanctuary of healing and hope, far away, in the mansion that was once her empire. Lady Isadora lived a cruelly different reality. The opulence seemed empty, an echo of her desolate soul. Influential guests disappeared, lawyers abandoned her, and the silence of the vast residence was broken only by bitter thoughts. The loss of fortune, status, and reputation had struck her with devastating force, more painful than imprisonment. She saw herself in the mirror, no longer the powerful woman, but an aged figure, eyes marked by regret and shame. Greed had left her alone, isolated in darkness. Luxury did not fill the void, nor did it erase the image of the feverish boys in the forest, a memory that haunted her. She had traded human connection for wealth, and the price was eternal solitude. In the village, joy was palpable. News of the final resolution had arrived, and the villagers celebrated with the quietude of grateful hearts. Silas, Kyle, and Ilara, by the bonfire, shared stories of the stormy night and the faith that guided them. The community proved that kindness, unity, and altruism could move mountains and bring down empires. They became an example, a beacon of hope for all who believed that justice, however slow, would always find its way. The human connection that united them was stronger than any wall of wealth or power. The white tiger, the majestic guardian, became more than a legend. It was a living symbol. Leo and Theo, even as they grew and understood the world, never forgot their savior. Their stories, told with reverence and gratitude, inspired everyone. The legendary feline represented divine intervention, unexpected kindness in darkness, and proof that nature, in its wisdom, can be the greatest protector of the innocent. Years passed. Leo and Theo grew into remarkable young men with their father's intelligence and Mara's compassion. They inherited the vast Valerius fortune, but never forgot their humble origins, nor the lesson that true value lay in bonds of love and justice. They used their wealth to support the village, building schools and hospitals, ensuring that no child would go through what they had. The village prospered under their generosity, becoming a model community where solidarity was the most valuable currency. The story of the Valerius twins and the white tiger echoed throughout the empire, a powerful narrative of overcoming, altruism, and redemption. It became a modern fairy tale, whispered from generation to generation, reminding that, even in darkness, the light of hope always finds a way. The cruelty of a greedy widow was overcome by the bravery of an animal, the compassion of a village, and the resilience of two children. Leo and Theo, hand in hand, looked to the future, their green eyes reflecting the promise of a more just world, a legacy of love, and the eternal memory of the white guardian who saved them, a true miracle that fully blossomed. Leo and Theo, now grown men, carried in their green eyes not only their family's inheritance, but also the wisdom of a life that defied cruelty. Their hands, which once clasped in despair in the forest, now joined in grand projects for the empire, always with a touch of humility and gratitude. The vast Valerius fortune, once a burden coveted by others' greed, transformed into a tool for transformation and hope. They were not content with merely rebuilding the village that had welcomed them so warmly. Their purpose was to weave a network of compassion across all lands, reaching those most in need. Schools, like the one they meticulously built, taught not only letters and numbers, but also the invaluable importance of empathy, solidarity, and altruism, values that Mara had instilled in them early on with acts of love. Hospitals, equipped with the best resources, offered healing and comfort, reminding everyone that every human life was precious and deserved to be protected. At the heart of every initiative pulsed the memory of the majestic white tiger. Its story, told and retold in every corner of the empire, was not just a children's tale, but a vivid reminder of the unexpected kindness that can emerge in the deepest darkness. Leo, who never stopped drawing the imposing feline, now painted vibrant murals in public squares, depicting the albino guardian with a reverence that touched the souls of those who saw them, inspiring everyone. Theo, with his calm and persuasive voice, spoke in important assemblies, using his own experience to advocate for just laws that protected the vulnerable and punished limitless greed. They were the personification of justice that prevailed, a living testament that love and compassion could, indeed, change the world for the better. Mara, now a woman with silver hair and a serene gaze, watched her boys with a pride that warmed her chest and filled her eyes with sweet tears. She saw them not as the fragile orphans she once saved, but as the strong pillars of a more promising future. Silas, the merchant who dared to challenge power, and the elders, Cale and Ilara, with their wrinkles of wisdom and gentle smiles, were paternal and maternal figures whose advice and stories continued to guide the young Valerius in every step. The village, once forgotten, flourished in prosperity, an oasis of solidarity, where the door of every house was always open to anyone who needed shelter and affection. Meanwhile, Lady Isadora, aged, forgotten, and consumed by bitterness, lived her last days in a small, modest property, stripped of everything she had once valued. The luxury was gone, the influence had vanished, and the silence of her solitude was her only companion, a constant echo of her past choices. The image of the feverish boys in the forest, which she had tried to erase from her mind with such vehemence, was now a constant shadow in her thoughts, a relentless reminder of her own cruelty. She had traded precious human connection for a fortune that could not buy her peace or redemption. Her destiny was proof that true wealth was not measured in shining coins, but in acts of kindness and the genuine love shared with others. Leo and Theo, hand in hand, walked through the blooming gardens of their new mansion, a home that was a sanctuary of hope and purpose, built on the foundations of love. They were not just heirs to a vast fortune, but to a legacy of love, resilience, and justice that inspired everyone. With each sunrise, the sun that kissed their faces reflected the promise of a world where compassion would always conquer the darkness of greed. The white tiger, their silent and legendary guardian, lived not only in their dearest memories, but in the heart of every person who heard its story, an eternal beacon that miracles are possible and that humanity, when united for good, is invincible. The seed of justice, watered by tears of pain and hope, had grown into a leafy tree whose fruits were peace, joy, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow for all, a true triumph of the human spirit.